Hello and welcome to Clusters. We've known of Paul's intentions to return to Jerusalem since verse 7 of Acts chapter 19, but he's been stopping and preaching all the way. Now in chapter 21, he and his companions are finally heading off towards Jerusalem with just a few more stops at some Greek islands on the way. They arrive in Tyre in the south of modern-day Lebanon before sailing south for Ptolemais, which is today called Acry. After spending a day with the Christians there, Paul travels on to Caesarea, where he meets up with Philip, one of the 7 who we last met up with ourselves in chapter 8, when he spoke with and baptized the Ethiopian eunuch. However, while he's there, Paul meets a prophet named Agabus. Again, we've come across him before in chapter 11, when he prophesied a famine across the Roman Empire. Here, though, his prophecy is specifically for Paul, and it's not good news for the apostle. If you'd been in Paul's position, would you have travelled on to Jerusalem? What do you make of Paul's response and his reasoning? Despite the prophecy, Paul goes to Jerusalem, where he meets up with James, the half-brother of Jesus and leader of the church in Jerusalem. Paul describes what's been happening on his travels, and they give thanks to God. But then James explains that there are some Jewish believers in Jerusalem who are upset with Paul because of what he's been preaching elsewhere. James suggests he goes through an elaborate cleansing ritual to show that he's living by the law. Judging by what he's been preaching so far, why do you think Paul goes along with this? But Paul is spotted at the temple before the 7 days of the ritual are over and is taken by the crowd. He's dragged out of the temple on the pretext that he's taken a non-Jew into the inner courts, an incorrect assumption on their part. But it justifies their actions. Paul is locked out of the temple and the crowd start to beat him. They stop, however, once Roman soldiers arrive. Paul's then arrested formally and placed in chains. There's a brief comic moment where Paul is mistaken by the Roman commander for an Egyptian revolutionary, but once that's cleared up, Paul asks to speak to the crowd, which he does in their local language of Aramaic. And basically, he gives them his testimony of who he was before he met Jesus, what happened on the road to Damascus all those years ago, and what's happened since. Why do you think he uses this opportunity to tell this part of his Christian journey rather than, say, preaching the gospel? It's a powerful story, as we've seen before, but the crowds aren't impressed and demand his death. The commander decides to have him taken to the barracks for flogging and interrogation, but is prevented from doing so by a centurion who informs him that Paul is a Roman citizen, a status which gave Paul certain rights. Not being flogged was one of them. Another was that he can't be put in chains, something that worries the commander who'd brought him to the barracks in chains. Oops. Chapter 22 ends with Paul being taken before the Sanhedrin, the Jewish religious council, so that the Roman commander can understand why they're so angry with him. But that's for another time. This has been a bit of a long video this time, but I've covered the next 2 chapters of Acts 21 and 22, so there won't be a video for the next study. But there will be a new set of questions, so keep an eye out for the email. That'll be it until the new year. So might I wish you all a very happy Christmas, and I hope you have a great cluster.